For 7 years, retired Deputy Sheriff Ronaldo Croft stared at the smiling photo of his daughter Evelyn and her new husband Dean, taken moments before they vanished on their honeymoon hike in 1992. The official story was a tragic accident, a shared fate on an unforgiving mountain. But when a wildlife photographer captures a stunning image of a bighorn sheep on an inaccessible cliff ledge in 1999, the weathered map pouch tangled in its horns ignites a cold hope in Ronaldo's heart, promising a truth far more sinister than he ever allowed himself to imagine. We all have mysteries in our lives, but some are heavier than others. As you listen to Ronaldo's journey for the truth, think about what you would do and drop a comment below. We read every single one. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in May, 7 years and 8 months after Evelyn disappeared. Ronaldo was in his workshop, sanding down a piece of oak, the repetitive motion of familiar comfort against the dull, constant ache of loss. The photograph sat on a shelf above his workbench, propped against a jar of screws. Evelyn, with his eyes and her mother's smile, beaming. Dean, with his arm wrapped protectively around her, the Yosemite trailhead sign standing like a wooden tombstone behind them. Ronaldo had always hated that photo. It was the last moment of pure joy he could ever attribute to his daughter, and it felt like a lie. The phone rang, and he almost didn't answer it. It was probably another telemarketer, but something made him wipe the sawdust from his hands and pick up the receiver. "Croft," he answered, his voice gruff. The man on the other end was named Elias Vance, a name Ronaldo knew well. Elias was a young ranger back in '92, but now he was the chief ranger for Yosemite National Park. "Ronaldo," Elias said, his voice hesitant, "something's come up. It might be nothing, but I thought of you immediately." Ronaldo's heart gave a single hard thump against his ribs. In 7 years, it was the first call he'd received about the case that wasn't a condolence or a procedural dead end. "What is it?" "A wildlife photographer, a guy named Jasper Wells. He was in the high country last week. Remote area near the Cathedral Range. He was shooting bighorn sheep. Sent us his photos for the park's annual contest. One of the images, Ronaldo, one of the rams has a bag, a pouch of some kind, tangled up in its horns." Ronaldo stood frozen, the phone pressed hard against his ear. A bag. He remembered the inventory list from their car, found abandoned at the trailhead. A green canvas map pouch was among the missing items. "How remote are we talking?" Ronaldo asked, his old deputy instincts kicking in. "Extremely," Elias confirmed. "It's a sheer cliff face he photographed it on, no trail access for miles. A place no hiker, not even the most experienced would ever be. That's why we're taking this seriously. How would a piece of gear get up there unless—" Elias didn't need to finish the sentence. "Unless an animal carried it there from somewhere else, from a place where his daughter and her husband had met their end." "I want to see the photo," Ronaldo said, his voice flat and hard. "I'll have a ranger bring a copy to you right away." An hour later, Ronaldo was staring at the photograph on his kitchen table. The image was crystal clear. A magnificent bighorn ram stood proudly on a sliver of rock, the vast Yosemite Valley dropping away beneath it. And there, caught securely in the curve of its massive horn, was a faded green canvas pouch, weathered by years of sun and snow. It was hers. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. This was the first breadcrumb in 7 years, and for the first time, the official story that Evelyn and Dean had simply slipped and fallen on a treacherous, icy path felt not just incomplete, but wrong. An accident doesn't leave a clue on a cliff miles away from any known trail. He looked back at the photo on his workshop shelf. Dean's smile seemed less protective now, and more like a mask. Ronaldo picked up the phone and dialed Elias back. "We need to get that pouch," he said. Getting the pouch was easier said than done. The location Jasper Wells had provided was in one of the most rugged and inaccessible parts of the park. Elias explained over the phone that a ground team was out of the question. The cliff face was a sheer drop of over 1,000 feet. Their only shot was with a helicopter and a highly specialized retrieval team, something usually reserved for life or death rescues. "It's not a rescue, Ronaldo. It's evidence recovery in a cold case. The Park Service has budgets, regulations." Elias's voice was full of apology. I know, Ronaldo cut him off. He had spent 30 years navigating that same red tape. But you and I both know this is more than just a cold case. This is the first real lead. That ram is a moving crime scene. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He used what little influence he had left. He called in favors from old friends in the sheriff's department and even made a quiet plea to a local congressman he'd once helped out of a jam. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, but they turned. A week later, Elias called back. "You got it," he said, sounding exhausted but triumphant. "We've got authorization for a single aerial attempt. We'll use a tranquilizer dart on the ram and have a specialist rappel from the chopper to retrieve the pouch. Jasper's coming up with us to pinpoint the location. We leave at dawn tomorrow." Ronaldo felt a surge of adrenaline he hadn't experienced since he'd hung up his badge. "I'm coming with you." There was no argument from Elias. He knew better. The next morning, the helicopter blades beat a rhythmic tattoo against the crisp mountain air. Ronaldo sat beside Jasper, the photographer, a wiry man in his 50s with a calm demeanor. He pointed out a landmark on the sprawling granite landscape below. "That's it. We saw the herd grazing on that ridge just east of the spire." The pilot, a young, confident woman, nodded and banked the helicopter. Below them, the world was a dizzying canvas of gray rock and green forest. They spotted the herd within minutes. The ram from the photograph was unmistakable, its horns a proud, curling crown. The specialist, a ranger named Ken, readied the tranquilizer rifle. The plan was delicate. They had to down the animal without causing it to fall from the narrow ledge. The helicopter hovered, its downdraft whipping at the unsuspecting sheep. The dart flew true, striking the ram in its flank. The animal staggered, confused, then slowly slumped to the ground just feet from the precipice. Ken gave a thumbs up, clipped his harness to the winch, and was lowered out of the helicopter, disappearing into the vast emptiness below. Ronaldo watched, his breath held tight in his chest. It felt like an eternity, but it was only a few minutes before Ken was being winched back up, a triumphant grin on his face. In his gloved hand, he held the faded green pouch. Back on the ground at the ranger station, they placed the pouch on a sterile evidence table. It was stiff with age and caked with dirt. The canvas was frayed, the leather straps cracked. Elias looked at Ronaldo. "It's your call. We can process it here, or you can take it." "I'll take it," Ronaldo said without hesitation. This was personal. He drove home in a haze, the pouch sitting on the passenger seat like a long-lost passenger. In the quiet of his workshop, with a smiling photo of Evelyn watching him, he carefully worked the stiff buckle open. His hands trembled slightly. Inside, the contents were damp, but not destroyed. There was a compass, its needle frozen and pointing south. A small, waterproof box of matches. A folded, yellowed map of the park. And wrapped in a piece of oilskin, a small, leather-bound journal. Evelyn's journal. He sank onto his stool, his legs suddenly weak. He opened the book. The first several pages were filled with his daughter's familiar, looping script. She wrote about the wedding, the drive to Yosemite, the beauty of the valley. She described their first few days of hiking, her words full of the joy and optimism of a new bride. Ronaldo's eyes blurred with tears as he read, her voice coming alive from the page. Then, about halfway through, the tone began to change. The entries became shorter, the handwriting tighter, more hurried. An entry from 3 days before they were reported missing read, "Dean was strange today. We were supposed to hike to Vernal Fall, but he insisted on taking a different trail, an old service road that wasn't on the main map. He said he wanted to show me a secret view. He got so angry when I questioned him. I've never seen him like that." Ronaldo's blood ran cold. He flipped to the next page. I heard him on the payphone at the lodge last night. He was whispering. I couldn't hear much, but I heard a name. Silas. And I heard him say, "The money." He saw me watching and hung up. He told me it was just an old army buddy, but he was lying. I could see it in his eyes. He turned to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, as if written in haste and fear. It was dated the morning they vanished. He woke me up before dawn. He said we're going on the hike he planned, to the secret view. He packed the map pouch himself. He said not to tell anyone where we were going. I'm scared. Something is wrong. This isn't about a view. Who is Silas? What money? I'm putting this in the oilskin. Just in case. The journal slipped from Ronaldo's numb fingers and landed on the dusty floor. Just in case. His daughter knew. She had felt the danger. She had tried to leave him a message. For 7 years, he had grieved a tragic accident. Now, he was looking at the preface to a murder. Dean hadn't just led her on a hike. He had led her to her death. And Ronaldo Croft, the retired deputy sheriff, the father who was supposed to protect her, had a new purpose. He wasn't just a grieving parent anymore. He was an investigator. And he had a name. Silas. Ronaldo spent the next 2 days locked in his study, a room that had once been his home office when he was on the force. He still had his old contacts, men who owed him favors, men who respected the badge he used to wear. He started with the basics, running the name Silas through every database he could get a friend to access for him off the books. It was a common enough name, and the search yielded hundreds of hits. He needed more. He went back to Dean. Before marrying Evelyn, Dean had been a bit of a drifter. He worked odd jobs, mostly in construction, and as a bouncer in Fresno. Ronaldo started digging into that period of his life, cross-referencing associates and known acquaintances with the name Silas. For 48 hours, he worked on nothing but coffee and a cold fury, poring over old case files and records. And then he found it. A connection. Silas Vance. In 1991, a year before the wedding, there was an unsolved armored car robbery just outside of Fresno. 2 guards were injured, and over $250,000 vanished. The case had gone cold, but one of the primary persons of interest, a man they could never pin down, was Silas Vance. Enlisted as one of his known associates, a man he frequently drank with at a local dive bar, was Dean Porter. Ronaldo stared at the faded mugshot of Silas Vance on his computer screen. A man with cold, empty eyes and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The pieces were slotting into place with sickening clarity. The robbery, the missing money, Dean's sudden insistence on a remote, unmarked trail in Yosemite. It was never a honeymoon, it was a retrieval mission. Dean had gone back for his share of the stolen cash. But something had gone horribly wrong. Evelyn, his bright, inquisitive daughter, had likely stumbled onto the truth. She had become a liability. The official file on Silas Vance was thin. After the heat from the robbery investigation died down, he dropped off the radar completely. No credit history, no tax records, no forwarding address. He was a ghost. But ghosts leave shadows. Ronaldo focused on Vance's known habits from the old file. He was an avid fisherman. He preferred rural, isolated areas. Ronaldo started searching for fishing licenses and property records in remote parts of California, Nevada, and Oregon, looking for any trace of the man with the scarred eyebrow. It was a long shot, a needle in a continent-sized haystack. But Ronaldo had nothing but time and a burning need for justice. He spent another week chasing down dead ends, his hope beginning to fray. He was about to give up for the night when he found it. A property deed for a small, run-down cabin and a bait shop on the shores of Eagle Lake, a remote body of water in the high desert of northeastern California. The property was purchased for cash in late 1992, just a few months after Evelyn and Dean disappeared. The buyer's name was listed as S. Vance. Ronaldo printed the map. Eagle Lake was a 5-hour drive away. He cleaned his old service revolver, the one he hadn't touched in years, and placed it in the glove compartment of his truck. He wasn't a deputy anymore, and he knew he was crossing a line. But this wasn't about the law. This was about a promise a father makes to his daughter. He left a note for Elias on his kitchen table, telling him where he was going and why. Then he got in his truck and drove north as the sun began to set, heading toward a final confrontation with the ghost from his daughter's journal. The drive was long and silent, the miles of dark highway giving Ronaldo too much time to think. He replayed the scene in his mind over and over. Dean, luring Evelyn up that trail. Her fear, her confusion. He imagined her final moments, and a fresh wave of rage washed over him, so potent it made his hands shake on the steering wheel. He arrived at Eagle Lake just after sunrise. The place was as isolated as the record suggested. A single dirt road wound its way down to the water, where a small, dilapidated building stood. A hand-painted sign swung creakily in the breeze, Vance's Baits and Tackle. This was it. Ronaldo parked his truck a short distance away and watched the shop for a few minutes. Smoke curled from a rusty chimney pipe, telling him someone was home. He got out of the truck, leaving the gun in the glove box. He didn't want a firefight. He wanted answers. He walked up to the door and pushed it open. A small bell tinkled overhead. The inside of the shop smelled of dried worms and old wood. Fishing lures and dusty equipment lined the walls. Behind a cluttered counter stood an old man, his back to the door, tending to a small wood stove. He was thin and stooped with age, his hair a shock of white. As he turned around, Reynaldo's eyes locked on the faint, silvery scar cutting through his left eyebrow. It was Silas Vance. Silas looked at him, his eyes wary. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. Ronaldo walked slowly to the counter. He didn't say a word. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out Evelyn's journal, placing it on the counter between them. He opened it to the last, shaky entry. Silas stared at the book, his face draining of all color. He looked from the journal to Ronaldo's hard, unblinking eyes, and in that moment, he knew. The past had finally caught up to him. He slumped onto a stool behind the counter, his tough guy facade crumbling away to reveal a tired, broken old man. "I knew this day would come," he whispered, his gaze fixed on Evelyn's handwriting. "I knew it." "Tell me what happened," Ronaldo said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me everything." Silas took a long, shuddering breath. "Dean was a fool," he began, his voice barely audible. "He had his share of the money from the job. All he had to do was lay low. But he was flashy. He met your daughter, wanted to give her a big wedding, a fancy life. He burned through his cash faster than a forest fire." He explained that the honeymoon was Dean's idea. He had stashed the rest of the money, Silas's share included, in an old prospector's mine shaft in the Yosemite backcountry. He was going to retrieve it all and disappear with Evelyn. "He wasn't supposed to bring her," Silas said, shaking his head. "That was the one rule, no attachments, but he was arrogant. He thought he could control her. Silas, paranoid that Dean was going to double-cross him, had followed them into the park. He watched them from a distance. He saw them arguing on the trail. "She'd found out," Silas rasped, his eyes welling up with tears, a sight that shocked Ronaldo. "The girl was smart. She put it all together. She confronted him. Threatened to go to the Rangers." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of a wrinkled hand. "Dean..." He panicked. He grabbed her. It was quick. He pushed her from a ledge into a ravine. I saw the whole thing. Ronaldo felt the floor shift beneath his feet. He gripped the counter to steady himself. "I confronted him after," Silas continued. "He was a mess, crying, saying he didn't mean to, but he had the money. He tried to pull a gun on me. I was faster." He looked up at Ronaldo, his face a mask of regret. "I did what I had to do. I took the money, and I buried them both. Deep. In a place no one would ever find them. I'm not proud of it. But that's the truth. I've lived with their ghosts every day for 7 years." A heavy silence filled the small shop. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the stove. Ronaldo's mind was a storm of grief and rage, but looking at the pathetic old man in front of him, the fire for vengeance he'd felt on the drive up had cooled to a hard, cold ember of duty. "Show me where they are," Ronaldo said. The authorities, alerted by the note Ronaldo had left, arrived an hour later. They found him and Silas sitting in silence at the counter. Silas Vance confessed to everything, his story matching the final, fearful words in Evelyn's journal. He led the deputies and park rangers to a remote, unmarked spot deep in the Stanislaus National Forest, miles from Yosemite. There, after all these years, they recovered the remains of Evelyn and Dean. A month later, Ronaldo stood in a quiet cemetery overlooking the hills of his hometown. He had finally laid his daughter to rest. The mystery was solved. The monster who killed her was imprisoned for life. But there was no sense of victory, only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He placed the small, framed photograph from his workshop on the grass in front of her headstone. Evelyn and Dean, smiling at the trailhead, forever frozen in a moment of deceptive hope. He finally understood that the pain would never truly go away, but the not knowing, the corrosive uncertainty that had eaten away at him for 7 years, was gone. And in its place, there was a quiet, heartbreaking peace. The truth hadn't set him free, but it had allowed him to finally, truly say goodbye. What do you think is the greater tragedy here? A life taken by violence, or a life lived in decades of fear and guilt, like Silas did? Share your perspective in the comments. If this story resonated with you, helping us by hitting the like button allows these important narratives to be seen by more people. Thank you for listening.